I'll ask the questions I hate every other speaker asking. But how many folks already use Sass, Compass, Susy, any combination of doing Drupal themes? Good. The rest of you are in the right room. I hope everybody can get a little bit out of it, but this will be, I think I've got the right target audience. This was a, we'll go ahead and get kind of started. Yeah, close enough at 30 seconds. So this, this presentation was a response to someone's request presentation. I don't know who that person is. Is it who here requested a using Sass in a Drupal theme? Anybody? One person had asked to show up. So I've been using Sass, Compass, and Susy on custom Drupal themes for quite a while now, and I have kind of a normal. All right, turn off everything but your reminders. Okay. So I work at a company called VML that is a digital advertising company, and we build custom websites for people. We use a lot of Drupal, and we do Drupal sites. We always build custom themes. So we don't ever use, well, very rarely will we use a base theme or a starter theme that you can find on Drupal.org. But almost always a very much a custom endeavor, because people don't come to a really expensive digital marketing company to have someone set up a WordPress site with a theme they bought. It's silly. So they come to us for custom websites. So what we're going to look at here is essentially the workflow, the tools, and the processes that I use to build a custom theme using Drupal. And it just happens to use Sass, Compass, and Susy, and a couple of other tools. Right? So what I'm hoping that everybody will get out of the talk is kind of a slice of the ecosystem that exists out there for building websites like this. So one of the hardest things when you get started in something that has a lot of movement around it in the technology field is picking the tools to use. So I want to use Sass on my Drupal theme, and I've got 50,000 different things that I can use to do that, and which one should I use? So you'll come out of here with at least, hopefully, a small set of tools that you can use, and we'll go over some alternatives as well. But you can use the same tools that I'm using to really easily get set up doing Sass, Compass, Susy on Drupal themes. Okay? So that's the goal. Also, we're a sponsor. We have a table, but nobody to man it. So I still have all of these entry forms for the drawing. I'm not going to hand out at my booth because I'm standing there. So if you ask a question, I'll give you a free, I'll give an extra one, right? Because a question, how about a question about the topic of the talk? Now I do have a lot of these to get rid of, so we may go to the meeting. Not you, you have too many. So Scott is a friend of mine from Kansas City. Yes, ma'am? How many entry forms do you have? I have, I don't know, at least a dozen.
One less, give it to me.
See me afterwards. Okay.
If you need more, you can always get more.
Yes. I'm like, there you go. I like this crowd already. My second thing was, please ask a lot of questions. I'm pretty sure I don't have 45 minutes of material or 42 from here. And I don't like monologues. I much prefer conversations. So I tend to be a nervous speaker. So if you ask me questions, I'll be a whole lot more calm and I won't talk as fast. So everybody will be able to understand. And if I do get on a roll, throw something and tell me to go slower, because sometimes I do get kind of wound up and start talking really, really fast. So I'm what they call a solutions architect at VML. I manage our Drupal practice there. I also help volunteer to organize, along with Scott and some other folks, our Kansas City local Drupal users group. So if you're ever down in barbecue land and you don't have anything to do on the last Tuesday night of the month, we have a monthly meeting. So our agenda. So we talked about the goal of being able to get set up with a kind of a CAM tool set that I like. We're going to do that, and we're going to show you how to set up all of that tooling. Then I'm going to show you how to get started doing a theme build. And this is, we're actually going to do a little bit of live coding and a live demo. So fingers crossed. All right. So it'll either be really cool or you get to laugh at me for floundering. And then we'll also cover, like I said, there's a lot of alternatives out there for doing exactly what we're going to do here. There are a dozen different ways to skin the cat. So we'll cover a couple of those things. So if you don't exactly like the tool set that I use, you can look into some of these other alternatives, or at least understand what they are, so you can keep an eye on them. They may or may not fit your problem set better. Everything that we're going to look at here is on the GitHubs. I have, this is, I'm going to trip over to my own wires. So this first one here is this Drupal Sass starter. So this is the code we're going to look at. So and this is the code that whenever I start a new Drupal theme, I just grab this, stick it in my theme folder, and modify it from there. Then we're also going to, there's the tool set that I use is installed on my virtual machine. And the Vagrant Starter Kit is a bunch of provisioning files that I use. They're all shell provisioners so they're super simple, sort of, to set up a virtual machine to do Drupal development. So if you're wondering, how do I install this thingamajig, and you can't remember exactly what we talked about, you can look in there and you can see how to set it up on YouTube. Okay? All right. So tools. So we're going to install Sass, Compass, and Guard in order to get the tool chain running. So in order to do that, we have to first install Ruby. So Ruby, so Sass, the original Sass processor was written in Ruby. So the normal way to run Sass is to use the Ruby version of the Sass compiler. There are other Sass compilers available. Most notably, there's a lot of movement in the Node community to get a native JavaScript going. I ran across one in PHP once and it didn't work, or it may have been less. But the Ruby one is the one I always use. This also really informed the rest of the tool chain that I use. So everything else that we're going to look at here, as far as the tools I use to build to manage all of the bits and bobs in Sass, are going to use Ruby. And one of the reasons I do that, because I've already got Ruby installed to run Sass, so why would I go through all the trouble installing Node.js or some of these other tools that just do the simple things that I need to do? Okay, so the first thing you need to do to get running is to install Ruby and Bundler on your system. Now, Bundler is the equivalent of Composer in PHP. So if you've looked at anything along in Drupal 8, you've probably run across Composer. Those tools manage your dependencies. So when we're running the Sass and Compass, you need a whole bunch of Ruby gems or Ruby libraries in order to run the compiler. Bundler helps you manage the versions that you're going to use. Because just like in the PHP world, and the Ruby world moves just as fast too, so you're using a version of a library one day, then you go to install it the next day, and they've upgraded it and broken everything. Bundler ensures that you're always using the same version of the tools that you used yesterday, and helps you to manage that. So if you have a theme that you built a year ago and you need to make a change to it, you can be assured that it'll work just like it did a year ago. More recently, there are things like libsass that have come about. You'll probably see that as you look at other tools you might want to use that help it make it a whole lot easier to use a very common Sass library in other languages. So that makes it easier for us to have a native PHP compiler for Sass, or a native JavaScript compiler for Sass for things in the Node community. You'll see those as well. So if you have Mac or Linux, you probably already have Ruby installed. If you're using Windows, use the Ruby installer at rubyinstaller.org. I haven't used Windows in at least 10 or 15 years, except to help my wife use her email. So take it with a grain of salt, but everybody that I ever know that wants to install Ruby always recommends just go use that and call it a day. On Linux, just use the package manager to install it, or if you want, and this is how you'll see it if you look at my Vagrant script that I referenced earlier, we use RVM, which is a Ruby version manager. It helps, again, it helps pin different versions of Ruby to your machine. Any of these will work, right? It's not picky. The Sass tool chain is not picky about the version of Ruby that you're using at all. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Sass. So Sass is the CSS extension language. So I'm assuming that folks at least know basically what Sass is going to do if they're in this talk. What it's going to allow you to do is use a better language to write CSS. So there's lots of good short. If you want to know everything there is to know about Sass and Compass, you should watch Andrew's talk that he did this morning, because he covered everything.
Right. Sure I did.
I work with Andrew, so I can give him a little bit of a hard time. So Compass is a CSS. It's termed a CSS offering. What it really is it's a collection of Sass mixins. So it's a bunch of extra things that that add on to the normal Sass functionality. It also provides a bunch of additional functionality like image sprites. So you can have a directory full of images, and then Compass will just compile them down to a big single image for you, and then it gives you all the syntactic sugar to reference that image in your CSS. It's really cool. Again, watch Andrew's talk. He covered everything on here, I'm sure. No, he didn't. No. Not all of it, but it gives you. It gives you more than just a few extra syntax on top of the normal Sass library. It does have some of those things like image sprites make building your web is a whole lot easier. Okay, so and it uses Sass natively, so you can't use Compass without Sass. So they're very much tied together. Compass is just built on top of Sass. Okay, and then Guard. And again, Compass is a Ruby gem, so it's a Ruby library. Guard is also a Ruby gem, and Guard is what we're going to use to check to see if anything has changed in our Sass files, and then compile them into CSS for us every time that you save them. So it's essentially a file watcher, right? There's a lot out there. We'll look at a couple of JavaScript alternatives at the end of the presentation. But all this thing is going to do is it's going to watch a directory of files that you tell it, and every time you change one of those things, it's going to run the Sass and Compass compiler and spit out new CSS. You can also use it to do things like live reload, which is kind of really cool. I don't have it set up here, but you can set up Guard to watch your Sass files. Every time one changes, it will recompile your CSS, and then it will tell your browser to reload the page. So you can just, in your IDE or in your editor, you can just type in your Sass, you save it, and then just watch it magically change in your browser. That workflow can, once you get into a nice groove doing that, you'll find yourself like never wanting to work any other way, because it's really, really fast, because you never have to switch in your brain from one application to another. You're only in your editor. So that I would definitely recommend if you hook up Guard, look into hooking that up, the live reload as well. Okay? We're all good so far. All right. GUI tools. So if you don't like the command line tools that I'm going to show you today, there are a couple of them that the Compass website recommends, Scout and Compass.app. Scout works on Mac and Windows, and Compass.app works on Mac, Windows, and Linux. There's a whole list of Sass GUI tools on the Sass website too, but Scout and Compass are the two that I know that work with Compass. But again, the big caveat, I don't use these, but they come pretty highly recommended if you're more of a GUI app type person. Okay, yeah?
Are you familiar with CodeKit?
Yes, that's another one. That is another GUI tool that does Sass. Does it work with Compass?
I believe so, and that's why I wanted to ask if you were. I usually just think about the Sass part, but I'm pretty sure there's Compass and Bebin support in there. Okay, so CodeKit is another one that I know that a lot of folks I've talked to like CodeKit a lot. So that would be another one to look at. Thanks, David. I'll get you an entry form. That's very good. Another one. I'll get you another one. Yeah. All right. I'll let you guys leg wrestle for them. Okay. So here's how let's just walk through a few steps to getting everything installed, and then we'll look at a demo. Okay. So Bundler. So this is Bundler is the tool we're going to use to install all the dependencies that we need to run our system here. So Bundler uses a file in this called gem file. It sits at the top of your theme directory. So right at the very top of your theme directory, you create a file called gem file, and you put what gems you want to use. So at the top, you can see over here,
I'm going to yank my computer off the table. So we're going to use Compass, right? And then we're also going to use a couple of gems called Susy and Breakpoint for our responsive design and grid layout. And then we're going to use Guard. So we don't have Sass in here because we don't, for Compass is going to install it for us. So Bundler not only makes sure you have the same dependencies all the time, it also does all the dependency resolution. And I'll show you that here in just a second. As soon as you run that file, run this bundle install, what it's going to do is it's going to download all of these Ruby gems onto your system, and then it's going to create a file called gemfile.lock that has a list of all of the gems you have in your that was downloaded, and it'll ensure that that's the versions that it always uses. Okay, I can tell you the different versions of Sass and Compass, since they're under heavy development, change a bunch. So it's definitely a good idea to make sure that you're always using the same ones until you have time to fix things, right? Because a lot of things will break as these things are upgraded. Especially as you can see, we're using an alpha version of Compass. So I've specified this alpha 19 version of Compass I want to use because I like Sass 3.3 and Susy 2, which are the newer versions of Sass and Susy. This has been extremely, I've been using this for months. That alpha 19, even though it says it's alpha, is very stable. So I wouldn't hesitate to use that. Okay, everybody, cross your fingers. Kill a chicken, light some incense. You're gonna try. Gonna get crazy here. Actually, it's not that crazy. I'm going to show you some directories. Okay, so this is my theme file. So that this is exactly what you would find if you looked at that GitHub repo, and you can see we have a gem file, and we'll just. Oops. My gem file, same one we looked at earlier. It actually has the gem, the guard reload, live reload at the bottom. It's just extra. We're not gonna mess with that today. That's one more thing I don't need. But you can see here, this is the lock file. So this is what's telling Bundler exactly what versions of everything to use. So we're using Sass 3.3, we're using Breakpoint 2.4.2. all of those things. So these are all the things that got downloaded and installed when we ran bundle install. Now I'm not going to run bundle install here because it uses the internet and it takes a while. Okay, so now we're all pretty much ready to go for using Compass and Sass. Let's flip back over here. All right. So let's talk a little bit about configuration. Compass. So there is a file, and you can see it out here. Again, it's at the very top, that config.rb file. That's the config file for Compass. It tells it where to find everything, where to put all of the resulting files. So Compass is going to look in the directory called sassdir. It's going to, that I just called Sass. It's going to find all of the Sass files in there. It's going to compile them, and it'll put them in the CSSdir. There's a bunch of other different directives like images. So if you're going to do image spriting with Compass, that's where you would put them. JavaScript, you can have it do some pre-processing on the JavaScript and all that kind of jazz. Look at the Compass documentation for all the configuration things you can do. It just essentially tells Compass where to find everything and what to do with it. You can also notice that we're putting in requires for Susy and Breakpoint. This allows us to use the mixins that are provided by those two Ruby gems. So there are additional Sass mixins that are provided by Susy and Breakpoint. We'll actually see those here in just a few minutes in order to do media queries. So that's all you need to do to get set up with Compass. And then there's one other one you have to. This one's really complicated. So this is the guard file. This just tells guard. I'll say I want you to watch, and this is a Ruby syntax. So %r says regular expression. So what its regular expression says is everything in the directory sass / and then or more characters .scss. It says I want you to watch all those any file that matches that pattern, and then every time that those things change, I want you to run Compass, because we said right here that we want to run Compass. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, so then to run it, you run bundle exec guard. So what this, when you run bundle exec, that says, I want you to look at that gemfile.lock, and I want you to run Ruby with all of those specific versions, and I want you to run the guard command. Okay? One more, then we'll start it. The Drupal file. You need just the info file is all you're going to need. So the neat thing about using Sass in a Drupal theme is that you don't have to do anything Drupal-y, except for put the resulting CSS file in that info file. And you only need one. Right? So Sass will take any, we'll look at the naming convention you use, but any CSS file that does not begin with an underscore, create a CSS file for that. But since we're using a Drupal system that is going to compress those all into one file anyway, if you turn on aggregation, I always just have all of my Sass partial files and have Sass compile it all the way down into one file. So there's only one line in the info file that specifies the one single CSS file that I produce with Sass. That'll make sense in just a minute because I'm going to do a little demo. Okay, so this, so we already looked at the config RB file here. We have the guard file that sits at the top of the directory. So again, all that's in that GitHub project. And then the, what do we call this, Sass demo? The info file. So you can see that I have just one style sheet. So if you remember in the config RB file, I said compile all of my SCSS files into the CSS directory. And then I always specify just one style sheet. I just called it style.css. So that's all you need to integrate your Sass compass and all that jazz into your Drupal. Easy peasy. Okay, lots of pieces. Did all that make sense? Sorta. Okay. All right. Now to run it, because we're going to do some. Okay, so now that thing is going to start looking at our Sass file, and we can look. Our CSS directory has those in it, and then our Sass directory has all of these in it. And we'll look at how those things work in just a second. Okay? All right. Everybody's getting quiet. Hopefully that doesn't mean we've all fallen asleep. Remember, I have entry forms. Okay.
I have questions all day. I mean,
okay.
I have the macaroni comatose.
Yeah. All right. So let's look. We looked at this. So the directory structure. We saw that there are already CSS files in the CSS directory. If you look in that GitHub repo, though, the CSS you won't find any. The CSS directory is empty when you start. So you don't create anything in there. You'll only put files in this hash directory. Everything that goes in that CSS directory is going to be something that's generated. And you saw that there were two. There was one that was a style CSS, and then there was a WYSIWYG CSS. You'll see why that's important here in just a second. So, organizing Sass files. So there are different ways you can organize your Sass files, and there's I think 3 or 4 of them here that I have seen that work pretty well depending on your project. And all these I think are perfectly valid. Kind of hit on when I use each one of them. So the page and site structure. So you can break your Sass files up into what's partial. So you can have a whole bunch of Sass files that all get compiled onto one CSS file. What it does, it allows you to organize your Sass code into multiple files that make logical sense instead of having one gigantic CSS file. So when I break up those partial files, this is kind of how I think about them. So the easiest way, and the way that we're going to see them today, is to break them up by your site structure. So I have a file for my header, I have a file for my footer, I have a file for my content area. I'll have files sidebars sometimes. It just depends on how complicated each of these bits and pieces of the site structure are to get these things set up. And then I have some global files that have just styles that span all of the different bits and pieces, as well as like a layout file for how to do the site layout. I've also seen folks organize them around Drupal bits. So they'll have a nodes partial and a views partial and a blocks partial so that they can organize them around how Drupal lays things. I don't think I've ever liked this. Some people do. What I find is that it's almost arbitrary to how you think about your styling your site. When you're styling a website, you're not typically thinking about styling Drupal things. You're thinking about styling HTML things. But for some people, for others, this does make sense. When sites get larger, I tend to come up along the lines of site features. So I'll still have global files or just content and headers and footers, but then I'll start breaking out individual parts for bits and pieces of site functionality, like blogs, pages, image galleries, rotators, whatever the site's going to have. So they'll have lots of chunks of different functionality on the site, and I'll have a partial for each one of those. And then don't forget your content authors. I'll also organize the Sass partials around a CSS file that gets created that I can integrate into the WYSIWYG editor. And that's part of the site structure that I have here. So what this is, in the Sass directory, every single file that does not start with an underscore, which is style.scss and WYSIWYG.scss, will get compiled into a CSS file over in the CSS folder. All the rest of these things get ignored by default. But what you'll see is we're going to look into these files, and you'll see that all of these partials are included in one or more of these CSS files. Okay, so let's go take a look. Demo. All right. So I want to show you, I think I'll get a little ahead of myself maybe here, but I want to show you the innards of one of these files. Okay, so in style CSS, this is where you pull in all of the bottom there in the project specific imports. These are all the files that had the underscore, right? Or could have been files with the underscore. So underscore variables, underscore layout.scss, that's where they're included. You have some imports at the top that pull in files from Compass, Susy, and Breakpoint. They're also inserted into the file, and then once you insert all of the Compass, Sass, Susy, and Breakpoint files and all of your SCSS partials, then Compass shoves all that through the Sass compiler, and out the other end comes a CSS file. Okay, so by breaking these SCSS files into these partials, it allows you to include them in here, and you'll see that one oddball there, global and WYSIWYG. Right, so I also have a WYSIWYG SCSS file that imports variables, global and WYSIWYG, and then content. And then in my, I use a WYSIWYG module plus the CK editor. And then you can tell the CK editor in the Drupal which CSS file that you want to use to style the content for admins. So I just reference that WYSIWYG.css file. So then the same styling that I'm using on the rendered page in my Drupal theme is also used in the WYSIWYG editor in the admin. That make sense? Now, if you don't do that, then you don't want to split them up that way. That's just like you can split things up any old way you want. But these are some kind of like my own pseudo best practices. Cool? How are we doing on time? You know, why do these things take 20 minutes when I run through them, and then an hour when I have a 45-minute? So let's actually start doing something so you can see how this works. Okay. Now remember, we've already started up guard. All right. So let's flip over here. So we've got guard. It's watching things. It's all ready to go. All right. So we're going to use a little bit of Susy to set these up. Okay. So we've already seen this. Right. We just talked about the style.scss file as well as the WYSIWYG. Okay. So we've seen all those variables. So in the variables partial, this is something that's included in that style.scss. I set, the top one's kind of a little bit extraneous, but the compass thing that allows you to set vertical rhythm. So this is one of the cool compass features that just comes along with it to mix in. it lays out the line heights and spacing of all of your text, so it's really, really easily readable. So if you ever look at a site that's really minimal and you say, wow, that's really pretty, and I don't know why, it's because they paid attention to things for them. So it makes it really easy on your eyes. Compass, you just set these two variables, and it just does it by magic. I forgot how it works. I just do it every time, and it makes my websites look nice. I've also defined minimum widths. So we're going to do a mobile-first site design. Okay? And I find that a ton easier than trying to do the desktop version, than trying to shoehorn that back into mobile. And hopefully you'll see why when we kind of go through this very simple example. So what we're going to start with is the mobile version, and then we'll kind of go up from there. So I set a medium width of 45 ems and a large width of 60. If I remember right, we don't use the large. There's also Susy variables that you can set in here. So Susy has a bunch of defaults that it uses when it's laying out a grid. One of them is it makes gutters, I think, 1/4 the size of each of your columns. Now, since I only have a couple of columns in this demo, I wanted to make it smaller. So this is where you would just override all those. And it's just an array of variables that you set in here in a variable called $Susy. Super simple. Okay, and this is a Sass variable that it sets, and Susy just reads a variable just named Susy. Okay, so that's all the setup we have. All right, this is going to be interesting. Okay, so let's go over here. We're going to take a look at our page. So, just in light of just full disclosure, I stole this from somebody else on the internet. And if you look at the starter theme, you'll see who I stole it from. So I gave them some attributions, but I changed it quite a bit. So don't think that I came up with all this on my own either. So this page file is kind of really where everything's going to go. So you'll see in here we've got a header, we've got a nav, breadcrumb here, messages, the content, and then the biggest ones that we're going to look at when we're taking a look at this theme is going to be content and then the two sidebars, right? So we've got our content laid out, so it's at the top of the page. So Google thinks that all of our content's the most important thing on our page instead of our sidebar, which is great. So you have your first and second sidebars down there, and then there's a footer. Okay? Now to make all this here we go. All right, so here's my website. Let's go flip it over to the new theme. Okay. That thing's awesome. Look at that. Isn't that the best thing you've ever seen? Okay, so you can see the headers, and this is the starter HTML in my starter theme, except I added some color. So you can see the header and footer in blue, the contents in white, and then the two sidebars are these two different shades of green. And if I'm not mistaken, if I can get a bit, look, it's responsive. It's very impressive. Okay. Believe me, it's very impressive. Okay, we're going to skip that one step. All right. So let's go and update a file. All right, so we're going to go into layout. That's empty. That's good because I want it to be. All right, so we saw it was just one big white page. So the easiest and fastest way to code is to copy and paste, right? So we're going to do that. All right, we'll save our file. And then let's take a quick look over here. So Guard saw that a file changed. So WYSIWYG didn't change because we don't include it in the layout, but it did overwrite the styles. So then we go over here and we reload it. Oh, except for here. Okay, what am I doing? It's too wide.
Zoom out on your browser.
Is that a control minus? Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you. Before that, it was it filled the entire width of the browser, and you can see that when you do So it just crunches. But when you get wider, it centers it. All right, and we did that because when you look at our code, so our layout has a include of a breakpoint. This is a Susy mixin. And I said I want to break it on the medium width. And then I want, when I do that, I'm going to include another Susy mixin that says set the container on the container ID of my page to 65 ems. So it just set the width of that container. Does that make sense? Okay. I know it's easy to gloss over things after you've run through your presentation 32 times. So let's go look at the next thing we want to do. So now we want sidebars that are on the sides. I don't like the way that that looks, so we'll go back over here. Okay. Over here to our layout. See, the last gal in here did a presentation. She said always use an IDE. She was wrong. You always use Emacs. So you see, we still have the breakpoints up at the top, but now we've said on the header and the footer and the nav, I want these to be. So what I've said, I've laid out a grid of 4 columns, right? So I want the header, the nav, and the footer to span all 4 columns. So 4 of 4 columns. But the content, I want to span 2 of 4 columns. And each sidebar, 1 of 4. So I'm going to have my content in the first half. I'm going to have the 2 sidebars in the second half. Okay? So let's see if that worked. Gotta click the right thing first. I'm a genius. Look at me. That's and then the cool thing is, it's like, okay, it did a ton of math. If you look at, and we can look at that in a second if we have a little time. So Susy just worked out all the math. So it said, okay, it's going to do fluid until I get down to my breakpoint that I set, which was whatever that, and I can't make it small enough.
Zoom in.
I got to zoom in again?
No, in, not out.
Oh.
Now.
Now try it. Ah, there we go. So when I hit that 65M, now my breakpoint kicked in, and my original layout became active again.
So can you set multiple breakpoints?
Yes. You set as many as you want, right? Normally I have 2. That's why I have a medium and a large, because default is small. So then I set a min width for the medium for tablets or whatever you want to, or landscape phones, whatever your design calls for, and then another one for desktop. I've also seen some that have really big desktop, or or other kind of even medium things if you want something that's specific for an iPad or something specific for an Android device of some type. But yeah, set as many breakpoints as you like. And you can do that. You can do that in here, and you can set as many as you want. So you just put in this break. When it hits this minimum width, you can change all the columns. Right? You can do whatever you like. You can just lay the whole thing out in a completely different layout. And just to kind of illustrate that, and thank you for the segue. So the one thing that we've got wrong is we wanted the sidebar at the beginning. So instead of what we have there, let's just let's grab this sucker. Susy gives us a lot more control over the layout. Sorry. So what I'm doing here is same breakpoints and everything, same header, nav, and footer. Now I'm giving Susy a little bit more information in that on this sidebar, I want it 1 of 4, but I want to pull it 3 of 4. In other words, I'm going to pull it to the left. So in Susy, you pull things to the left, you push things to the right. So I'm going to grab that first sidebar and pull it over to the very beginning of the page.
You also prefixed the as well?
Yeah. I glossed over that. So let's zoom out a little bit, reload, and now my sidebar is my first sidebar is on the left, and my second one is on the right. If you've ever tried to do this without a library, it'll drive you absolutely out of your mind, right? But Susy makes it super easy. And the reason you want to do this is because this looks that way to my user, but it looks completely different to Google, or to somebody with a sight impairment. If you're using a screen reader, right? People want to read what's on your page, just like Google wants to read the content on your page. They don't want to read your search box, right? That's secondary information. You want the content of your page at the very top. And by using techniques like this, it allows you to build the visual design for people with eyeballs and your content for people that are just reading it. Make sense? How are we doing on time? Oh, good. I got 5 minutes. Fantastic. Let's see where we are here. Okay, let's spend 5 minutes talking about alternatives. So Sass. There isn't one. If you want to use Sass, you have to use Sass, right? There is less. I have heard very little about less lately, but that is an alternative to a Sass preprocessor. It uses a bit of a different syntax, but it accomplishes the same thing. It compiles code down into CSS. Compass. So there are other collections of Sass mixins that you can find. Bebin, Neat, and Bitters are one that's pretty popular, at least around our office. Bebin is a mixin library, so it's got a bunch of additional kind of Sass mixins. Neat is a good framework, so it's an alternative for Susy. And Bitters is something that doesn't exist in Compass at all. It's termed a scaffold for styles, variables, and structures. So it's essentially same defaults for things like lists, paragraphs, and headings, stuff like that. What I have seen is this collection of libraries in particular is very common with folks at VML that do a lot of just front-end work. And they do a little bit of Drupal work too, and they want to use the same collections, mixins, and things that they're used to, right? So if you're doing just plain old HTML, it kind of gives you a place to start, but if you're just plain old HTML, it's just kind of all over the place. So things like Bitters gives people a starting point. So a lot of folks like those things. And it's really a nice library. For Compass, you can use Mixin replacements like Bebin, Sass, and Bitters, as well as another build system like Grunt or Gulp or Guard that we're already using here in order to run these things. Right? So if you don't like this, you're not going to get so if you're using Bebin, Neat, and Bitters or any other just plain old Mixin library, you're not going to get things like the Automagic Sprite compilation. But things in Guard and Gulp will do it for you. All right, so if you want a replacement for Guard, Grunt and Gulp are two JavaScript node applications that do essentially the same thing. They're build systems. And one of the things you can use them for is to watch file systems and run things when things change. So you can use Guard and Gulp as a replacement for Guard. They do more than just that, though. So they're a bit bigger systems. They also are, especially in the Gulp world, under a lot of change now. So they're pretty hard to keep up with. I like Guard because it's dead simple and just uses Ruby. But if you find yourself needing something other than just a file watcher and you need to do processing under JavaScript or CSS or any other things, Gulp and Grunt are definitely good tools to take a look at. And then there are larger frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation. We've got, I know one guy at work that really likes Foundation in his Drupal sites. It uses Sass, but also it uses a different grid system than Susy, and it provides a whole bunch of defaults. What I found is that it's like a starter theme that you would download or a base theme, is that I end up tearing out a whole lot more than I end up using. Right? So if you find yourself building sites that are the same a lot, and close to something you would get with Bootstrap and Foundation, great. You can use those. If you're building demos, those things are great because they give you a nice starting point. And last page, resources. Already pointed out, my GitHub account has the starter theme that I use, as well as the Vagrant files I use to install all the libraries. There's all the links to Sass, Compass, Susy, Breakpoint, Guard. Omega 4 is a good one to look at because it uses a very similar tool chain, if not almost identical. So if you want kind of a different just kind of second look through on a project that uses the same tool set, Omega 4 is a pretty good place to look. It's a bit bigger, right? It's a lot more than I need. And level up tuts. So for some reason, I like watching this guy's videos. And he's got a whole series on Susy, on Sass. He's been doing one on Gulp recently. So if you're someone who learns well on videos and you just need a second kind of go through or whatever on the same subject, I highly recommend looking at those. They're 5 to 10 minute chunks of videos, and it's just like a whole series. So he'll go through 30 or 40 minutes or so of Susy videos, but you can watch them in little chunks at a time. Okay? We have 30 seconds for questions, and I have a whole stack of these. I've only given out 2 so far. Does anybody have a question? I don't think anybody's going to die, because we do have a 30-minute break after this, so I don't think that, we have a field boss that's going to, she's mean. They'll probably kick us out, but I'll stick around. Here, go.
Will you have your show available?
Yes.
Not just video, but
Yes, I will. I'll put the whole deck up on, and I'll put a link to it from the DrupalCorn website.
okay.
Yes.
Is there a difference between responsive and adaptive design in your show? Can you explain that?
Go. You can.
Okay.
I can sort of.
So
It was cheap.
responsive means that all of your content is always visible. All of your content on every device is still there in the market, and you're not
You're just
pulling
kidding.
content out. Who asked the question?
I did.
Okay, sorry. You're not removing features and or removing content from the view of the user when you're doing responsive. But if you're doing adaptive, that means you're pulling out features or adding new features in to adapt to the device that the user is using.
Yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yes,
So-
it does. Thank you for that.
So is your definition device dependent, or is it screen size dependent?
It can be
That's
super
where-
dependent.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be, but you're adapting what is actually being displayed, not how
It's being displayed, but what is being displayed. Yeah.
There's a lot of different definitions for adaptive.
There is, right. And some people conflate it with, or that's kind of why I asked, because some people always define it as they use devices. So if I'm on a mobile phone, then I'm going to use maps that are different than if it was on a desktop. Oh, sorry, you had a comment?
Sass and Compass, could you access like
Hold on.
different apps? Like let's say like someone was presenting earlier from the Iowa department, like a map. Can you then access like maps on like a iPhone or like on an Android and pull up that map and like where all those locations are too? Like you have access to do things like that with Compass and doing more of an adaptive kind of design?
No, in that you would have, if you're going to do something that's device dependent, you have to be able to detect that you're on a physical device, right? So you have to, like Susy's breakpoints are all based on the screen width.
Okay.
So they're not based on any type of headers or anything that are coming in from a device. There is there's a module in Drupal that does it pretty well. I think it's like, I'm going to forget what it was. Mobile Detect or something like, I think it's Mobile Detect. It uses a PHP library that interrogates, I believe, the headers, among other things, probably, to decide if it's on a tablet or a mobile phone or a desktop, laptop, computer.
You could also use something like Modernizer to Git to find that, and it would add a class to the body tag, and you could, in theory, key off that for your files.
Yeah. Those are perfect, really, really close, but they're not 100% full. Any other questions? All right. Andrew set up a BOF for tomorrow at 11. Is it 11 o'clock? To talk about Sass, Compass, Susy, anything else related to this topic. He had given a talk earlier today on Sass and Compass. Kind of fills in a lot of the gaps that left out in this one, so that would be a good one to watch too, or just come at 11.
I'm giving a talk tomorrow too on Drupal 8 themes.
Okay.
With newfangled awesomeness, and a lot of that newfangled awesomeness
Is all this
stuff like this, like that.
Excellent.
Like similar
What time is that?
front end technique. I think I'm at I'm at 2:15.
2:15 tomorrow if you have more interest in the same types of topics. Okay? Great. Well, thank you all for coming. That's all my contact info. And I'll